Awesome. Hey, everyone. I'm Angela K. Evans. I'm the Labor Cohort Manager at the Solutions Journalism Network. We're a mission-driven nonprofit looking to transform the journalism industry by giving folks the information about the responses to social and societal problems happening in their communities. I'll talk a little bit more about solutions journalism in a minute, but first I wanted to give everyone on the panel a chance to introduce themselves. So Alexis, we'll start with you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alexis Terrazas. I'm the editor-in-chief of El Tecolote newspaper. Have been in that position since June of 2014, and I am a very proud graduate of this program. Rochelle, Jesse, both of you I know very well, and I'm delighted to see that the work that's continued by the students here, such as yourselves. And I'm excited to have this conversation because, and I'll get to it a little bit more in the questions too, but solutions never seem to be part of my identity as a journalist. I never seemed like part of my job description, so I'm really excited to talk about that aspect and this new journey that we're on.
My name is Kevin Epps, and I'm the chair of the SF Bayview National Black Newspaper Foundation. It's a part of the historical SF Bayview Black newspaper, which has been around 47 years, and so the foundation is responsible for keeping the newspaper on solid foundation and ground and continue to build on the legacy going forward, and I look forward to engaging in this constructive conversation.
I'm J.R. Valray, the editor-in-chief of the San Francisco Bayview newspaper. I've been in that position for about 2 months, but I've been an associate editor for about 10, 12 years, and I've been a writer with the Bayview for about 23 years. I went to a program actually in this very room, Bama, in 1995. And so I didn't graduate from the journalism program, but I did graduate from BAM. It was like a summer program. So it's interesting that we are having this discussion in this very room.
Hello, my name is Lourdes Cardenas, and I'm an associate professor here at San Francisco State University. I am behind the creation of the bilingual journalism major here in San Francisco State, and I had been a reporter for so many years here in the United States and also in Mexico.
Hi, my name is Lorena Garibay. I'm an SF State journalism student, and currently I have been interning / doing a fellowship with El Tecolote and the Solutions Journalism Labor Cohort, and we have been focusing on domestic workers in San Francisco and the creation of an app that would help them keep track of those paid sick leave hours and payments. So I'm very excited to have everyone here so we can have a very interesting and productive conversation.
Thanks, Lorena. Lorena actually is responsible for organizing this, so we really appreciate you putting in this effort. So again, I'm with the Solutions Journalism Network. I've been a journalist for about 10 years, first in the Eastern Sierra and now in Colorado. I joined the Solutions Journalism Network about a year ago after I worked on several projects in Boulder, at the Boulder Weekly and Alt Weekly in Colorado, that were focused on solutions specifically to homelessness, affordable housing, and the democratic process. As a journalist myself, I've really enjoyed the philosophy of solutions journalism, giving me an opportunity to report on how communities are responding to the problems that they face versus just consistently repeating the problems, which can be very depressing for our readers, our audience, and us as journalists. So Solutions Journalism Network, what is it? Again, we're a nonprofit, and our definition of solutions journalism is really simple. It's rigorous, evidence-based reporting on responses to social problems. I'll say it one more time. Rigorous, evidence-based reporting on responses to social problems. And so within that definition, we have kind of our four, we call them pillars, but they're kind of the four key aspects that we look for in a story to really make sure it is doing, kind of what we hope it is, what we hope it would. And so the first pillar or kind of aspect is it has to have a response. A lot of our stories are around problems, but the way I like to talk about it is the response is your nut graph, the response is the thesis, the response is the thing that you're examining. Yes, you have to give it context by explaining the problem, but 3/4 of your writing should be directed towards the response, 1/4, if not less, towards the problem, right? Because a lot of these systemic and societal problems already have lots of reporting on them. And especially in a lot of places and communities, we know what the problems are. We need to know what people are doing to try to fix it. So that's number one, is the response. Number two is the evidence. It can be qualitative or quantitative, but we are looking for some hard evidence on whether or not something's working. Data, community anecdotes, people outside of the organizations or programs trying to fix the problem or promoting the solution, right? We want that outside perspective on whether or not it's working. Number three is the limitations. What isn't working? No problem, no solution is perfect. We have to ask, what are the challenges? What are the things limiting them from being successful? And sometimes, honestly, the limitations are so great that maybe in the end, that solution's actually not effective. Still a solution story if we're, again, talking about what people are trying to do. And then the last one, and I'm going through these fast, but just wanted to give everyone a context, is insights. What can others learn from what this response is attempting to do? How can they try it in their communities? How can they build upon it? How does it go beyond one person trying to do something good, one organization trying to do something good? How is it actually going to contribute to overall change? So that was very brief and fast, I get that. But I'm going to start asking the panelists questions, kind of directed specifically. Everyone is obviously allowed, I don't know if that's the right word, to respond also if something comes to mind that you want to address. But I'm going to start with Alexis. You are part of our labor cohort, which is a program directly looking at worker-led solutions. How did this idea of solutions journalism kind of change the way you look at your career, change the way that you approach the work at El Tecolote?
Sure. And I guess for me personally, like I view my career as in almost two parts, right? Like when I started out, my mentors very early on, not here, but at a community college, were very old school. Identify the problem, report on the problem, and it's not your job to look into solutions, right? You just report the facts. And then, of course, when I began at El Tecolote, a newspaper, and I'm proud to say this, that is rooted in activism. It's rooted in amplifying the voices that have oftentimes been erased in mainstream media. We began to apply, just by nature of being in that newsroom, our stories took on a different approach that was different from the one I was kind of brought up in. However, we didn't have the guidance, like we didn't have these pillars, to kind of guide us. So we always tried to do journalism that amplified the stories of our communities, that amplified the specific problems that certain people in our community were dealing with. But we kind of almost would do it more or less in the dark. Like I said, we didn't have a structure for how to, we just kind of did on instinct. So when this opportunity presented itself, it presented not only an opportunity in terms of funding to go after and cover a story like this, but it offered a structure to be able to do that. And there are many problems, many issues affecting the very audience that we served. So I don't know if you want me to go into that specific story. The one Lorena had reported on. Thank you so much, Lorena. But I think that's kind of how, that's how I view, and that's the opportunity that solutions journalism gave us. And how now, if we can, because we're a small team, we have limited bandwidth. I know y'all are busy. Y'all are journalists too. So as much as we would like to apply the same thinking to all of our assignments, it's really difficult. Good journalism takes a lot of time. So, but at the very least, every story that we do, we try to view it through a lens of intentionality. Like, what are the things that we want most to get out of this story, and who do we want it to serve? What kind of impact do we want it to make? And I think these pillars have served not just as a guide for this story that Lorena has worked on, but have helped us kind of look at other coverage that we're doing as well.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, Lorena, do you want to explain the story or play the video? Or both.
Why don't we need ordinance, paid sick leave ordinance, which by law entitles them to receive that pay. So yeah, as I said, it's kind of a continuation of that. And through that video, we can see the human side of domestic workers. Oftentimes they're seen as, and we mention it in the video and they say so themselves, they're seen as machines that just are there to act as a vacuum, act as a broom, as, chemicals to clean everything, totally ignoring, their own humanity.
So, Lorena, I did want to ask you, so in reporting that story on the domestic workers, how did solutions journalism, direct your work, affect the angle that you took? How did it change things from maybe how you would have approached the story otherwise?
Yeah, if I would have approached the story without the solutions journalism angle, it definitely would have been a ABCD, 1, 2, 3, 4 story. Like, just go report on what's going on with the city trying to create this app. And it would literally just be that. It would have been like, workers are happy about this app and this ordinance. The city's working on the ordinance, and that's it, But with solutions journalism, we had to change that and think of it as, okay, they're excited about this app. They're excited about the ordinance. The city says they're working on the ordinance. What's next after that? Like, show us what the city's doing. Show us, what these domestic workers are expecting the city to do with that app and when they are expecting to receive those benefits. So yeah, I think it really made us investigate it in depth, and we ran into some interesting stories and also some obstacles within those efforts part of the city.
Yeah. I know, you had some limitations. I'll ask you and Alexis about those in a little bit. But I did want to make some time for the SF Bayview. Obviously, in your work, and what we've talked about with what solutions journalism is, how does it help community-oriented newspapers connect and report in communities in order to report more impactful and more impactful stories for your community?
Well, I can't speak on solutions journalism because that's not what we term anything that what we do. Mm-hmm. We do liberation journalism, and we do freedom fighting journalism. And so we call ourselves a community newspaper, and what we do is community journalism with the emphasis on community. We see ourselves as community peoples first. Journalism is what we do. So how does that affect stories? That affects the stories because if the community sinks, we sink. And we see ourselves invested in the story to that extent. We're not outside members. We're not disconnected. A lot of our stories, because of where I come from one of the biggest families in Oakland. I have over 200 relatives within the boundaries of Oakland. Kevin Epps is a legendary filmmaker in Hunters Point. So I'm saying we have a wide breadth of community network that stories come through. And we're just two of the many people on the staff. So we have a vested interest. We look at writing stories from that viewpoint. We cover campaigns. We cover campaigns. Police terrorism is definitely one of the big campaigns that we cover. Police abuse of the Black community. But, it's getting a little bit wider than that. They were trying to bring robot dogs to San Francisco. And it actually got approved. Then it got unapproved. But it's still up for another vote. So it's not off the table. So we've been covering police terrorism regularly as a beat since the 90s. I've been covering it since 2000 with the paper. So we look at it a little different than I think a lot of platforms look at it. We have a vested interest in Oakland and San Francisco in the Black community, and we see ourselves as kind of a shield. We're a media shield for our community as well as a media sword.
And Jay, I think you should add too. Even though although it's a national Black newspaper, I think it speaks to the issues across the diaspora that people of color have dealt with, specifically people of African descent. So even though it's a localized, story and focused on that, it also resonates on a global scale with other, communities of color too. So that's important to point out.
In this paper right here, we have something on Cuba and what's going on with the embargo on Cuba. We also cover Haiti a lot and what's going on with the U.S. keeping Haiti destabilized. We constantly talk about the Congo. We see all these laptops and everybody got a cell phone. That wouldn't exist if the Congo wasn't being raped by the United States, Western governments, but being directly raped by Rwanda and Uganda, but they're selling the cobalt and the coltan to Western governments and Western corporations. So, we cover stuff all the way up internationally to what's going on in Hunters Point. We have, like I said, stories about Haiti and Cuba in this, but we also have a story about a football league, a local football league or a baseball league where people can sign up. So in terms of, I guess to bring it all the way back to solutions journalism, we see liberation journalism as a way that people can get involved. We don't look at ourselves as being a platform where we speak and you just looking at us in a fishbowl. This is life. You could be a part of it. And we make sure that we angle our stories so that people could be a part of it. We make sure that we concentrate on people who are accepting people to be a part of their movement. And that's kind of what the Bayview is into, as well as even when we cover events. Unless it's one of our big events, the only events we cover is things that are about to happen so that you can be a part of it. Because it's a community thing. Am I really being community if I tell you, we had this dope party or we did this dope campaign, but you couldn't be a part of it because you wasn't here last week? And you'd be like, well, how was I supposed to know? You didn't put it in the paper. But, so you have to look at, even that's a bourgeois mind state, and journalists have to be conscious of that, and editors have to be conscious of that.
Yeah, I love that. That's like one of the things we say is journalism is not just who, what, where, when, why, but it's how and what can you do about it. And so that's exactly what you're talking about, JR. Thanks. Lourdes, I did want to bring in kind of your role here at SF State and this idea of creating a bilingual, multicultural journalism department. Based on what everyone has said, how does solutions journalism, or these concepts we've been talking about, apply to the work you're doing with students and kind of your approach to journalism in general?
Right, thank you. With the bilingual journalism program, what we want is to train journalists that a younger generation of journalists who can see the complexity of the minority communities, and particularly the Latino community or Hispanic community or Latinx community, right? Because there are so many names to refer to the community. I always say that, and it has been demonstrated, that the coverage of the Latino community is always stereotype. And the stories that we read about the Latino community are always the same, right? Immigration stories, crime stories, and in most of the stories, Latinos are portrayed as victims, right? And I think that seeing the communities in that way is missing a huge point, that is the resilience of the Latino community in this country. I mean, if there is a community that is resilient, I think it's the Latino community. And of course, there are so many communities, but I think the Latino community is extremely resilient because all of the things that they have to endure in their own in their own countries, and they're coming here to the United States and being rejected, being stigmatized. So they usually are working together in fighting all of these forms of discrimination and marginalization. So what I envision is to see our journalists just looking at that complexity and thinking of resilience as a way to survive and to find solutions to the problems, right? I mean, we know that Latinos have a very high rate of lack of insurance, right? But that doesn't mean that they don't get help. I mean, they don't have a health, coverage, but in the institution they don't get it. But they find the ways to create all of these networks that can help them, right? And that can provide solutions for this particular problem. And you can see it in many, many fields, in health, in access to food, in housing. So I really would like to train journalists that can see that part of the community, right? And of course, immigration is important, crime is important, but let's break that. I mean, let's just break that stereotype and let's try to see the community with a different lens. So that would be that's my goal with the program.
Yeah. Awesome. Did we have that video? Cool. I'm going to have Alexis and Lorena talk a little bit more about their story, but let's watch a little bit of this video first.
Hola, mi nombre es Lorena Carrillo. Soy housekeeper. Trata de mirarme a mí como si estuviéramos teniendo una conversación. Ok, no a la cámara. No a la cámara. Okay. Hola, soy Lorena Carrillo de la colectiva de mujeres. Soy limpiadora de casas y cuidadora de niños y de pacientes.
Terminamos. Mi nombre es Andreina Maldonado, mucha gente me conoce como Nina Limón y soy trabajadora cultural, soy la directora artística que está pues llevando el proyecto. El nombre del proyecto se llama Nuestro Trabajo, Nuestra Dignidad y es una obra teatral que habla acerca del cuidado del hogar, de la dignidad de les trabajadores, el ecofeminismo y la justicia ambiental. ¿Cuál es nuestro papel en esta gran crisis que estamos viviendo?
But yeah, so Alexis and Lorena, I know that you, as you talked about, you were looking at this ordinance that created paid sick leave for domestic workers and whether or not it was actually being implemented, more than a year after it had passed. You already talked about a little bit, Lorena. I love solutions journalism because it really puts a little bit more fire behind accountability journalism because, I could go on in that, but I'll have you two talk, especially because you were looking for this evidence and you were looking to see what others could learn, and the evidence didn't really present itself. So talk a little bit about how you worked through that.
Sure. Yeah, and just a little bit of background. So you might have saw the captions up front that there was this historic legislation that was passed in San Francisco granting for the first time ever domestic workers access to paid sick leave. And when that happened, it was celebrated, right? And because we're part of a labor cohort, this made total sense for us to look at this story as a labor story, as a solution story. And this wasn't just celebrated in one or two newspapers, it was celebrated in quite a few other stories. But then when you start to kind of look between the lines, there wasn't exactly an infrastructure already in place. There were a lot of promises, a promise of an app, all of these different things to like make this come to fruition. So when Lorena started to kind of dig, we saw that there were a number of still challenges ahead that still have yet to be resolved because this ordinance is in place now. But the last time I had communicated with the city agency that is in charge of issuing paid sick leave or tracking paid sick leave to domestic workers, they had literally no data for us. So here is this thing that was celebrated, that was getting coverage all over the place, and that they were promising an app and all of this infrastructure to help track it. But for a monolingual Spanish domestic worker who's an immigrant, who maybe didn't go to high school or college, how are they supposed to navigate this system? So that was one of the many challenges. And Lorena, I want to give you some space to talk about some of the interviews, but in a sense, like we were able to identify like a problem. We know, and the other caveat to this too was the COVID-19 pandemic, and how that was not just devastating to many industries, but particularly put domestic workers at risk. And a lot of times domestic workers, I don't remember the exact percentages, but a huge percentage of domestic workers are undocumented, are immigrants. So it's literally an invisibilized workforce that is getting promised all of these things, but there's no infrastructure in place to deliver those promises as of yet. Lorena, I want to pass the baton to you to share a little bit about that story.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really frustrating because and it's not just something that we've seen time and time again in like the Latino community, it's throughout all of our communities. We have, times where the city or government makes a lot of promises and we're all cheering for, those promises, but they never come into fruition. Like Alexis said, either because of the infrastructure or just a lack of planning or organizations maybe not keeping an eye on it and not pressuring them to, cumplir lo que prometieron, to make those promises become reality. So with this story, we interviewed domestic workers, yes, but the app is supposed to be happening through the Office of Workforce and Economic Development in San Francisco. That was who we were going for when we were asking for data and any information, any updates. The people that we were able to contact, they said that they had like a plan and they were getting ready to send out Request for Information Act, which, they send them out to companies that are going to be taking care of the whole tech aspect of that and creating that app. When we try to reach back, it was silence. They didn't have any information on those companies yet. They had very little knowledge of the domestic workers, including, I also want to add, the people that we spoke to, yes, they were domestic workers, but a lot of them also did, we're working with, gardeners, people who, they're called jornaleros, so day workers, right? So they do different things, but they fall into that similar category. So in that video that we showed you, it was made up of, yes, men and women who take care of the elderly, children, people who are in charge of, cleaning, their employer's house or property, people who do gardening. So that's who the app is made for. The other interesting thing is one of the other limitations was when I reached out to another app that's not based in San Francisco, I found that it was on hold. And I asked them, why is your app on hold? Do you have any data? They didn't really have any data either. And they ended up telling me, well, we're actually on hold because we're waiting to see what San Francisco's going to do. And I'm like, well, tough luck. Like, I don't know when that's going to happen for you guys either. So it was very frustrating. And once we start talking about limitations, that itself became a big part of the story. They're not putting enough effort into making this app a reality, into giving this community support. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. It shows how solutions journalism can really take a story deeper, even if it means you're saying something's not working that people are trying to say is. Yeah, and kind of for everyone, I'm going to open it up now, and I do want to give time for people in the audience to ask questions. But one of the things I'm kind of hearing across the board, too, is this idea in journalism school often we're trained not to become too involved with our subjects, otherwise we're going to appear biased. But when you're reporting in communities, for communities, specifically, it's pretty essential to be kind of JR, like what you were saying, like you're a part of the community too, and that separation doesn't really make sense. We've also seen a lot of times this journalism philosophy to remain unbiased create very extractive reporting. I like to call it helicopter reporting, right? People coming in and trying to report on an issue they don't understand at all and then just leaving again. So how do we as journalists kind of balance reporting in and for our own communities, especially when they do lack representation in mainstream media, and still upholding, or staying journalists, in short?
What does staying journalist mean to you? What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I'm getting at is like.
No, you said being a part of the community and staying journalist. I don't.
You don't understand what that means?
I don't know what you mean by that.
Yep, I kind of keeping with this idea that we are reporting unbiasedly, which I know I don't actually agree with is possible, but we're just reporting the facts like that. Like I'm saying the broader theory of journalism that we're taught.
Well, I want to address it, and I think that I just made my point. There's cognitive dissonance even when you explain it. I think that there is no such thing as unbiased journalism. How fast I ask you the questions, the tone of voice that I use, where we do the interview, the lighting during the interview, how close I am to you. Is it direct eye contact or not? How direct my tone is. All of that reflects biasness. All of that. So journalism in America, what I call bourgeois journalism, mainstream journalism, teaches you that because they want to restrict you and control your thinking. We're not controlled by that. We're not controlled by that. Yes, we're advocates of the Black community, period. And we're unapologetic. We're unashamed to say that. This is a Black newspaper. That's one of the first things that you see on there. So, I mean, I think you have to be clear on what team you are on. Are you on this bourgeois journalism team, or are you the Latino community, or are you the Black community, or the Asian community, or whatever? I think you have to be very clear on what team you're on, and you got to fight for that team. I'm not worried about what journalism has to say as long as the Black community is prospering because of our journalism. I'm not worried about what the New York Times or even San Francisco State, no disrespect, but we're not worried about that. That's not what we're concerned about. We're concerned about Hunters Point, the Black communities that we serve across the nation, completing whatever it is that we're setting out to do, being empowered. That's what we care about first and foremost. Journalism, that's like that might be a small 157th.
Yeah. Anyone else want to respond to the question?
Yeah, I think also too, and I'll just speak from my background, right? I feel like you mentioned the word extractive, and I feel like a lot of times, especially when my formative years, like this place, SF State, helped nurture me to be the journalist I am now. But when I first got my start at my community college, it was very much like this extractive mindset, right? Like you just go out and get the story at all costs. Like you don't worry about the impact that's going to have on somebody else. So I do think my thinking has changed since then, and I do still see a lot of journalism function in that regard. And I agree with you too, JR, on the subject of all journalism is there's no such thing as objectivity, because even when you boil it down to the barest, right, of I'm gonna report the facts so my audience will have an informed opinion. The fact that you want your audience to have an informed opinion means that your objective is for that person to be influenced. You want that person to be well informed. So how does that relate to our newspaper? We identify because of our experience. Lorena, you mentioned your mom is a domestic worker. My mom, for a time, was a babysitter and cleaned hotels, right? So we know already, we're familiar with some of the things that our community deals with. So it would be counterproductive, and I'm speaking to every journalist in this room, for you to ignore your personal experiences, your own knowledge of certain communities, and not apply that to your job as a journalist, right? And I think, I think that's how I maneuver this complicated question, or this tricky phrasing of the question. How do you still advocate for your community while still being a journalist, right? In air quotes, right? Like, it's like you can't sacrifice, in my opinion, your knowledge, who you are, because I feel like that bolsters your journalism. I feel like that makes you a better journalist. Of course, you always want to quote people correctly. There's things that we learn in these classrooms that hopefully you will take into your careers, that will make your journalism what it is.
Do you learn that in the classroom, to quote people correctly? I think you're giving too much credit to academia. Your mother would tell you to tell the truth.
Right.
So I'm saying, let's not play with these academic jargon.
For sure.
We learn that not in academia. We learn that in the streets. You learn that from moms.
Yeah.
Tell the truth.
Yeah. No, agreed. Yeah. So
I also think that, again, going back to what JR said, and what Alexis had said, my mom, she is a domestic worker, and I'll share with you what happened like a couple days ago. My aunt, who also works with her, while we were in Mexico, my aunt had to handle all of the clients by herself. It's heavy work. I also consider myself a part-time domestic worker. I go and I help whenever I can. And one of her clients was very upset because for an entire day of work, 2-story house, she was upset that my aunt was charging her, I think it was like $210 for that day. That lady flat out told her, "But you're just cleaning houses. I don't think it's right. You shouldn't be earning $210. And my aunt proceeded to say, "Well, it's fine. You can talk to my sister about it." "Oh, yes, I will. I'm not going to be paying $210. You shouldn't be earning more than I earn. More than I earn. You should not be earning more than I earn." So going back to, extractive journalism, I could not see myself doing this story without applying my experience as a part-time domestic worker, as the daughter of, domestic workers. And I don't think some of my sources would have shared certain stories and information with me if I wouldn't have, spoken the language, B, said to them, it's okay. This is my experience. I completely understand where you are coming from. So I think that really did help me approach this story in a more, deep way, also applying solutions journalism. So, yeah.
Can I add something? Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that you are saying. I mean, I'm in academia now, but I've been a journalist all of my life. And when I came to the United States, I'm an immigrant, right? I'm an immigrant, and I'm a privileged immigrant, if you want to call it like that, because I came with a visa, whatever. But I really understand the struggles of my community. I know that I'm privileged, and I'm very aware of my privilege. But as a Mexican, as a people who has, relatives who have immigrated to this country, who have who have report on that stories, I identify with them. And I cannot detach my own experience and my own bias and my beliefs in the community, the things that I see in the community, and the injustice that I see, right? So I think that we cannot detach ourselves from the communities. But as I always tell my students, and actually yesterday I was talking with one of my students about that, because in her story she was very opinionated, right? And I say, okay, that's your opinion and that's fine, but show me with the experience of the people that. Don't say, you don't say it, right? Because you are just like a lead, making the story go to some place when the people who are there are gonna tell you that, right? So, and also, just have evidence for everything that you say. If you have evidence, you can have your bias. You can say that there is injustice. Yes, of course there is injustice. There's police brutality. Of course there is police brutality. But we have to have evidence all of it, and we have it, right? Yeah. So use all of this evidence so nobody can say, oh, you are doing activism and your journalism is biased, right? I mean, yes, I'm biased, right? I'm part of the community, and I'm not going to deny it. But I also have the evidence to support everything that I say, and it's what I ask my students to say, because I think that is very important, particularly when, journalism has been attacked for so many fronts. So we really have the only thing that we can say is I have the evidence. I mean, I'm talking about injustice, and I have all of the evidence here. So you cannot question my story because it's biased, right?
Can I say something?
Yeah, of course.
Who has the power to question though? So that's even a subservient role by even trying to answer that question to somebody who's outside of our community talking about it's unbiased. My first question was, what is your self-interest in our community, and what is your self-interest in even telling me this? So I think it's a bourgeois idea to even have to even think we have to respond to that. Like it's not a question with me. I'm an advocacy, freedom fighting Black journalist, period.
I have a couple other questions, but I definitely want to open it up. Does anybody out there have any questions for our panelists? Yeah.
I'm very curious about that, JR and Alexis. I just want to know, how has the community... So I'm very, curious from both JR's perspective and Alexis' perspective. How has the audience reacted to your journalism compared to someone from SF Chronicle or SF Standard, where you both of your newspapers might have written similar stories, but obviously one comes from the community and the other might come from somebody who lives, farther away from the community, and then just inserts themselves to learn about and extract that information, and then, head back to the newsroom and move on to the next story. So I just want to know about that.
The Oscar Gregg campaign was the fact that you guys see a movie. We were very much the seed of the Oscar Gregg campaign. We were the first paper to write about it. That was outside of the Chronicle. I was the first reporter to bring it on KPFA radio when I was a journalist on the radio. We covered it regularly. We talked to members of the family. We talked to people in the community, and we kept the story going. So when you say, how does the community respond? We were at the rebellions. I caught a charge for being in the rebellion. I also covered the other people that caught charges in the rebellion. We went to LA when the case went to LA. We went to LA to cover it after I beat the charges. But the fact that you can see Fruitvale Station, the movie, speaks to the Bayview's work. Now, I don't say that we take total responsibility for it, but in the Black community and Black journalism locally, we definitely take responsibility for it, because the other Black newspapers were scared of it, and they don't write from a grassroots perspective like we do. So the fact that people around locally and in California and the nation know who Oscar Grant's Uncle Bobby is, that we were the first ones to put him on stage. We was the first ones to give him some media training and tell him, oh, you might want to do this, or you might not want to do this. We were the first ones to hook him up with different people nationwide, because even though we're talking about the Bayview and we're in San Francisco talking about this, we have contacts with people like political prisoner Mumia Abu-Jamal, who's fighting for his life, and we constantly cover it, and we constantly have him in the paper, so that people can see that we're not just fighting for a celebrity, we're fighting for a Black man, a father, a grandfather, but also a journalist, somebody who is producing in the community regularly. So when you say, what has the community's effect been? Basically, we're like the police. Our community, a lot of our community doesn't call the police. They call the Bayview. And Kevin has been there, and we trying to work out, Kev, do you know the person that can help with this housing? Yeah, call I mean, a lot of times we are the community switchboard, because we do not rely on the police, because they kill our people and unjustly treat us and unjustly lock us up. So we were just talking about this 2 days ago, how in a lot of ways, even though we look up to the Black Panther newspaper as a predecessor, in a lot of ways the Bayview newspaper is not just the Black Panther newspaper, but in some ways the Black Panther Party itself, because we are doing a lot more than media, and because we have access to a great network of people that we've covered or that are allies or that subscribe, and we use that network to the fullest to fight for our cause, and the people respect it. And not just even on a fighting aspect. Kevin will tell you that we were social media before social media. We're just bringing it back, but on the back cover, we do like a community out in the streets type of page where you can see pictures of some of the local artists, the local people, the local organizers, and you see people in real life. A lot of times you'll see just Angela Davis, but you don't get to see her laughing and hanging out. And you don't get to see your brother who was talking to Angela Davis in the picture with her. So we try to like humanize and regularize everybody. And, you know, there's people that are popular in the community, but other people may not be as popular, but they're just as valuable. So we put them on the back also, so we can bring down the celebrity status that American capitalism and bourgeois society conditions us with.
What's community reaction to us? One of the things that we've learned is, and we learned this lesson a lot, is that our community is not a monolith, right? It's we're a diverse group of people, despite what you might hear on national media, especially during election time when they say how are Latinos voting this time around. You know, a lot of our coverage recently has been on police violence. You know, the mission itself, and y'all read the Standard, y'all read all these other newspapers, right? There was, just to give you an example, there was a 78-year-old Head Start teacher that was attacked by somebody who was intoxicated in the mission, and you know, several leaders exploited that. In my view, exploited that to call for a larger police presence. Now we wrote a story a few issues back, it might be here, kind of looking at this data, because at that press conference there were a lot of outlandish comments that were made. That murder is at, you know, the murder rate is the highest it's ever been. Crime is the highest it's ever been. And we took SFPD data and actually disproved that. You know, so how did some people react to that story? Some people were very with it. Some people were not, you know, because some people, you know, view public safety as more police, you know. So that has been, so I apply that thinking to all of our stories. The response from our community regardless of what the story might be, is never going to be uniform because our communities are different. At the very start of this year, we also run international news. We had the coup and the removal of then Peruvian President Pedro Castillo. I have a friend actually who's a journalist, and he was in Lima at the time and covered it and wrote it. And it was a well-reported piece, but it was also very personal. Like, what does this mean again for a fellow Peruvian? You know, to have hope and for it to be dashed right away, when he wrote a brilliant story, and it was actually, for lack of a better word, very balanced. Like, he took his time with it. And then we actually had somebody come in to the office, because we have an open door policy. If you want to express yourself, you can. And we actually had somebody who was incredibly critical of the piece, and, you know, was along the same lines of like, all these protesters that the police are killing in Peru, they're all terrorists, which is kind of like the same thinking that supporters of then dictator Fujimori kind of present. And this guy was actually, in fact, a fan of the dictator Fujimori. So what's the reaction from our community? It's mixed. It's always mixed. It's never uniform. And that's a brilliant lesson to learn when you're covering certain communities. Never make an assumption that all of these communities are monoliths. We all have very, very different experiences, as Ana Lourdes Cardenas mentioned, you know, being like used the term privileged immigrant, right? Like, not all of us. And that's important to highlight, because not all of us have the same experiences. Everybody in this room has their own experiences, and it's always important to keep an open mind, especially when you think you know what the subject is, when you think you know what the story is, to have that open mind.
Hey, I just wanted to tell y'all, we read that story in the mission. We read that in our newsroom about how to cover some stuff like that. So I just want to give y'all a shout out for that story.
Any other questions out there? I have one to close out.
She had a question.
Oh, I didn't see. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Rochelle Canigal. I'm a professor here in the journalism department, and we're planning to, our student newsroom is planning to apply for Solutions Journalism grant uncovering mental health. And I'm just curious if you have any tips or advice on applying for grants. And so I'd love to hear that.
I was actually able to talk to some of the students ahead of this. Our main goal is to get this type of journalism making this switch from traditional journalism into more community-led responses more broadly. And so I think anything that's focusing on that has a lot of potential. And I'll talk to you afterwards because I think the big thing, and Alexis can speak, we do understand the state of journalism. We know that funding's an issue. We believe that this is just good journalism, and that we aren't the Solutions Journalism Network isn't the owner of this idea, where it's not a registered trademark. It's nothing like that. We really just want people, kind of the same method that we use in the journalism applied to this whole philosophy of you all get to take it and run with it, of what does covering responses in your community look like. Do you have the evidence? Do you have the limitations? What can it do to help others get involved or try it? But I think any sort of ideas that are really focused on that way, on that trajectory, have a really good chance with us. But let me connect with you afterwards about a little bit more specifics. I'm definitely going to stick around afterwards. So, any other questions? Otherwise, I have one to end with if no one else.
I have a question for JR.
Yeah.
Yes. I would be curious about thinking, what are the stories? I suppose that there are so many, but what are the stories that mainstream media are not covering about the Black community that needs to be told, that urgently need to be told, in addition to police brutality, which is the story that we always read about that. So what would be the stories that you pointed out?
That's a very interesting question. But why I say it's an interesting question is because I look at every story needs to be told from a Black perspective in our paper, But to answer the question even more precisely, for example, in the last paper, we talked about why is there not an anti-war movement in the Black community, even though we're on the verge of World War III, and how all these different countries are engaged in war because it's not hitting the mainland of the United States. Why is the Black community, and I'm asking the Black community, why are we not engaged? And I talked to a member of the Black Panther Party, and I talked to a member, another activist elder, and they were just weighing it out, and I weighed it out with my own opinion. That was one story. Another story we were talking about in this paper right here, we're talking about the cashless society and how does that affect the Black community in particular. A lot of times we don't try. Definitely there are stories that are Black, and we recognize that. Carnival, that's probably important to everybody, but the Black people are even going to have more, just like the Latino community, it's going to have more of an emphasis on Carnival. But things that don't get seen as Black are also Black, like the cashless society. How is it going to affect the lowest rung of people on the economic spectrum? People that may not have bank accounts, people that are getting out of prison, so I can't get an ATM card for a week and a half through the mail, but how am I supposed to eat? And I got to get out of prison today, and now cash is illegal. And we're talking about something that could be a reality at the end of this year, something that, the Fed now is coming into effect in July. So that's something that we're getting out of. We do tell Black stories. Like I said, we talk about the case of political prisoner Mumia Abu-Jamal, even though I think that that's an international story. The Black press has been keeping it alive since 1981, and we're going to continue to keep it alive until he's free. So those are some of the stories, but some of the issues we cover, just like every other community: housing, education, and how it affects our community specifically. A lot of times you'll hear experts talk about minorities, but even when you look in the cup of minority, Black is usually at the bottom of minority. So we got to have a different conversation about Black and how to solve the issues that the Black community is coming from, because at a lot of times we're at the biggest deficit. And so that's just kind of some of the philosophy of how we look at it. But I mean, we cover, drugs, we cover mental health, we cover police terrorism, we cover empowerment, we cover Black businesses, we cover, we're getting into more science, but we've been covering the science at the shipyard. Ahimsa Sumshai, Dr. Ahimsa Sumshai broke the story about how the Navy was trying to cover up radiation at the shipyard, and we're still covering it. So, and there's been awards and all kind of stuff written about it, but Dr. Ahimsa from the Bayview, who's been with it for 25, 30 years, she's definitely a legend. But Marie Harrison died a few years ago, and she led the charge against, she was a writer that led the charge against PG&E in San Francisco and how it was polluting the Black community in particular. It could be a pollution story, but if his grandmother got cancer, it's bigger than a pollution story. Pollution story is just, it's affecting the air and the soil and eventually, but no, his grandma got cancer though, and the exact same cancer that pollution creates. So that's kind of how we approach it.
Kevin, did you want to add?
No, I do want to add that it's very important that we control the narrative, because for so long our stories, if we allow outsiders to narrate our story, it's doomsday like it's always been. So we can't expect them to change the narrative, because that's what's been working for them. So I think it's important, like this Bayview, this paper has been very important to the community on so many levels. I started delivering this paper when I was 12 years old. That's like 30, 40, like a long time ago. So to see like the resilience and the commitment of this publication and what it means to like the community is, it's inseparable. Like there's no separation, because I think people look to this to help them, to guide them in their daily lives, like what's going on and how can what's being read in here be applicable to like what people are dealing with for real. And I think the paper has been doing that, and we can't, the Chronicle is just not going to do it, and so in the context of that, I think community paper is vital to the lifeline of our communities and the health and wellness going forward, especially now with, heard somebody say how media has under attack and it's fake news, and how like that narrative can be used to discredit like ethnic and Black media. And that's what that is designed for, to discredit the important stories that need to be told. So
I'm real sure I wanted to say one thing to build on what Alexis was saying. Like he was saying that, the Latino community is not a homogenous thing. Black press isn't either. Not just the Black community, but the Black press, even in this city. We have different class points where we identify with class differently. We identify with who our target audience is different. We talk about different stories. We identify different. We might all identify as Black, but some are Pan-African as Black. Some feel like they're only United States Black. So I mean, it's a whirlpool of things. Even when you look at the Black press, it's like its own world. Just like I'm sure the Latino, not even the Latino press, the Mexican press can be its own world. And you can break it down even further. So I'm just saying, just know those of y'all that are not from these communities, just know it does get that complex, even right here in this city.
Do we have time for one more? Is it time? Okay, cool. I just feel like I want to end a little bit bringing back these two concepts that Lorena kind of envisioned for this idea of bilingual, multicultural, kind of what you're just saying, like non-homogenous community reporting, and this idea of actually covering the responses that are coming up out of those communities and focusing on that instead of just the problems. How do you all see that serving your community differently than stories that just report on the issues, the problems, the statistics? Like kind of basically why do you, like we've talked a lot about this, but why Alexis, why did you want to pursue just solutions journalism? Why do you guys report that way?
I think in this case, in our very specific case with this domestic worker story, it's not enough to just celebrate something for being the first piece of legislation passed in the country, because despite what people want to believe, the pandemic is still happening. We're still feeling the effects of that, and who are feeling the worst effects of that? I'm not even gonna get into it's a racial group; it's a class group. Right, and we're talking about folks that clean houses. These kinds of jobs are reserved, and I don't mean to belittle folks, right? What people would consider, or what society would consider, folks who are at that bottom class, and those are the stories that we want to amplify, right? So why are we doing it? Because we know while this app is still being created, this suffering is still happening. We also understand that there's this very real stigma within, like folks that have these jobs of push through no matter what. Even if I am sick, I'm going to go to work because I still we live in one of the most expensive cities in the country. So what option do some folks have of not going to work? Like if you get sick, you're going to go to work, right? So that's why I think what I want, hopefully, is for us to continue to keep pressure on those who hold power, right? And keep them accountable for this because people are still suffering. That's what I hope comes out of this. I don't know if I answered your question precisely, but that's what I hope.
Do either one of you? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I just think that journalism can play a more constructive role in public life if we really give voice to the people that needs to have the voice out, right? I mean, it's not just giving the voice to the officials or people who are always have the microphone to talk, but people who are doing different things to survive and to thrive in society. So that is our responsibility as, in my case, at training future journalists, just to think about how you can play a more constructive role in public life with your stories and, engaging the community and empowering the communities.
Yeah. Agency and empowerment. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I think, for example, something that affects a lot of our multicultural communities is, the lack of care and funding in education, especially K through 12. We always, you see all these parents fighting at school board meetings to get teachers to, it's incredible that teachers have to buy their own supplies, so this has been going on for like decades, like trying to constantly fight with school board meetings. And I remember being in high school and going to school board meetings because my teachers weren't getting paid enough, and some of them actually left our school and they were amazing teachers. And we lost those teachers, and all of us ended up suffering, So, again, holding them accountable. If you're promising something, they can't be empty promises. We should educate our communities into listening better. Okay, what is this person saying? That's great. Now where's the evidence of you actually having a plan to get these things going, So.
I forgot the question. What was the
Just basically, how is this idea of reporting on community-led responses, how people, how reporting on that is actually serving our multicultural communities better than, again, these traditional journalistic practices we've been talking about?
Well, I think we have to look in a liberating sense. I mean, you could tell your child, or you guys may not have children, but you can tell somebody, your little brother or sister, something negative all the time, or you can use positive reinforcement to get what it is that you want. So a lot of times, people like to talk about the problem because, the problem is sexy. That's what sells media, but but it's also sexy to empower people, to see a smile on people's face, or for them to be excited about an issue and they can get involved. You know, have you ever, I mean, maybe you haven't, but it feels good to me when somebody's like, what, that's going on? And I say, man, well, the meeting is next Wednesday. Oh, I'm there. That's the best feeling in the world. I mean, people can give you accolades. Oh, you the editor-in-chief, you the this, that, and that. That matters more. Why? Because you're helping people's life. It's not just an ego booster. It's actually changing the direction and trajectory of people's life, even if it's just for that day, even if it's just for them to give voice to something that they care about. But you're activating them, and that's what our journalism is about. We see ourselves that lead it. It's not just for revolutionary minded people, because we go all the way to Democrat. We don't go past that though, but Democrat to revolutionary people. But we see ourselves as being a town hall meeting too. It's not an organizational newspaper. Everybody doesn't have to believe like me. We want to put different aspects of what we see, the progressive black spectrum, because we need to argue with each other. Just because I feel like I'm the most progressive doesn't mean I'm the most pragmatic. And maybe these ideas are way out, and it's somebody who may be seen as less progressive who's more practical though. And so, you know, we have these, we open our newsroom up for that, and we open our newspaper up for that, and we open ourselves up for that, because we realize there's, even how the public might look at it, there's no star on the journalism team when we have our newsroom discussions. It's no big I's and little U's. We having a discussion. We're trying to get the most practical story so that it can change lives and not just make people feel good, but activate people into being a part of something, being a part of changing their reality in, you know, in a political way, but also in cultural ways. Maybe you're a drummer. Maybe your child needs to drum this summer and you don't know, you just moved here. You know, where are the swimming classes at? You know, and because me and Kevin was talking about this the other day, you know, we pride ourselves on being this political and cultural giant, but we also need to do more of being a resource. And you can find out how to get housing, or when the football team signs up, and, you know, all of the little stuff that people don't know who to ask. We should play that part. And so I guess to bring it all the way back to solutions journalism, or what you guys call solutions journalism, we want to be the solution to everything and be a community resource in every aspect, not just the political aspects and the social issues. But, you know, if you're looking for a gardener that's local, we got one, you know. So.
Yeah, I wanted to, I was just thinking about Mutulu Shakur, who's Tupac's father, if you will, and the Bayview did a lot of coverage. JR did a lot of coverage on Mutulu Shakur's specific case, and I point that out to say this paper has been a very strong read paper for incarcerated folks. You know, black people are in jail, black men are in jail, period. Look at the numbers, they don't lie. And so over the years, this has become a sort of go-to piece for those brothers inside those cages. And so, and as an important publication, it allows for them to have some insight and a window into what's going on out here in the world. And so we're sort of focusing on like the career paths. You know, you can't be a driver anymore. Uber driver thing is about to end. There's self-driving cars riding around my house every day. So the landscape is changing. And so allowing for people that are coming home, specifically back to our community, to have a window into what's happening, what's going on. Like I said, a career path, how to get a job, how to apply for housing, resources, and things like that. So I think it's important to have these type of publications to give our people the information that they need.
Yeah, I love that. Reporting on solutions and also being the solution in a lot of ways too. Any last questions or thoughts from anyone on the panel or anyone out there?
I want to just say I'm honored to be on the panel. I thought I learned something from all of you. And, you know, and hopefully this isn't the last panel that we do together. You know, the Bayview is definitely open. We're open to discussions. We don't claim to know everything. We definitely are specialists in our community, but we're always open to new ideas and also new debate and trying to come up with new creative, innovative solutions, because the old ways aren't going to work. And so, you know, we invite y'all. Actually, I wanted to say something else. We have a journalism program, a community journalism program. If you guys are interested in just seeing what we do, you know, we got to do it in an organized manner, but let us know. And we have it on Mondays and Thursdays from 6 to 8. It's 420 friendly, so if you're not opposed to that. But other than that, you know, we sit and we have Newsroom, and we debate. We bring speakers in from all different walks of life, not just from the Black community. You know, we definitely are going to invite El Tecolote. We would definitely like to hear what you guys are doing, also at State. And so, you know, we just want to open it up, and we're open to discussion and being partners and whatever. So thank you guys. We honored to be here, and we hope this isn't the last.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. I think I can speak for myself. I'm available if you have any more questions about our organization or how we help support newsrooms like El Tecolote, specifically in this case. But definitely sticking around. And, yeah, thanks, Jesse, and everyone for having us. Lorena for organizing.
Thank you.
Yeah, good.
Very informative.
Good. I'm glad.